General, I saw a mountain lion this week. I saw a mountain lion.
A real mountain lion?
Yes, I was in the truck traveling south out of Oklahoma towards the border with Texas. And this area is mountainous, but it's not mountainous like you imagine huge mountains.
Oklahoma. But so I've never been to that border, but if there's going to be a mountain lion, it's going to be at the border of Oklahoma, where two things happen out there: mountain lions and meth runs.
Yeah, there wasn't any meth involved. This was I saw this beast on the roadside. As I approached it, the first thought was, wow, that looks like a really big fox. No, that's not a fox. Maybe that's a coyote because it was tan colored. And as I got close, I realized, no way, that's a coyote. You could see the paws on this thing were just massive, and it had this shovel head face. And then it took one step, and it moved like a lion. You know, this big, powerful movement that no other animal moves like.
Shoulders.
Yeah, just in the shoulders and the head. The way the head moved, this big shovel face just moved towards the road and looked at the road as I passed. Because this was about probably 3-4 o'clock in the morning. There wasn't really anyone on this road.
Do you normally drive that late? Is it the beginning of your day or the end of your day?
It's probably the middle of my day. It's probably about the middle.
So that means that you probably began work at midnight?
Yeah, usually 10, 11, 12 will get started. And I think in this case, though, I was coming back definitely after I made a delivery in Tulsa, which Tulsa, incidentally, I should mention, is the welding capital of America. There are great welding schools there. That's where you learn how to weld.
Really?
Yeah. I met a welder in Alaska the year before you came. He got the job of engineer, which is always a strange job when they say you're an engineer up at the cannery. It's like, you have an engineering background? No, I was a welder in Tulsa. I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Well, think about it. If you actually got through a legitimate apprenticeship program in Tulsa, and you had a decent amount of capital, and you brought your own tools with you, maybe you did the drive to Alaska. That would be particularly impressive. If you came with a good pickup truck with your gear already, your torches and your tanks, and you don't have a drug habit, and you're stable and you can secure your own residence, you'd be a hot commodity in Alaska. You'd be able to work and garner a very, very high wage, especially during fishing season, when they need spot welders to repair boats at the last moment.
Oh, I think welding is a great skill to have for almost anything. You can use that to repair boats, as you said, but also any kind of equipment, like all those metal totes that we used at the cannery. Those were all created by the welders, the supposed so-called engineers. But this guy wasn't doing any of that work. He was just assigned to manage the fish house, the equipment in the fish house. And he had no idea what he was doing, and he hated it. He totally hated it, and he quit. He didn't even last the whole season. But it was interesting, though. He said, "I don't know what I'm doing here. I was making $26 an hour plus time and a half overtime welding school buses in Tulsa." So he was making a lot of money. That's a really good job. I mean, imagine that, $26. So you're making almost $40 an hour overtime welding.
Now, at a certain point in America, pretty much any guy who wanted to work that hard and get that kind of skill would have a job waiting for him. There is this unemployment among young guys, and I think it's because the horizon of employment has been substantially delimited. They're not even thinking about doing something like that. The very idea of doing something like that is preposterous. I'll be honest with you. The idea of working with my hands ever in my entire life was preposterous. Other than the janitorial work I did when I was 17, which really wasn't that manual. The idea of working in Alaska with my hands, especially getting paid less per hour than what I got paid as a janitor. I got paid $8 an hour as a janitor.
Yeah, I look. I know the argument. If you just look at wages, it doesn't look very good. But you had room and board paid for. There are people that have office jobs in New York City that take home a lot less per month than the cannery worker in Alaska does.
Well, I'm sure you could point to a lot of people that take their first job in New York and get into debt after a couple of years.
I think most people. I think New York has become an impossible place to live. I mean, I was lucky. I kind of got in at the last time. That job started at $30,000 a year plus a $5,000 like living stipend that was paid out over the course of the year. So you're basically living on $35,000 a year, and that even then was hard to do in New York. I had to live in Spanish Harlem, and I took a roommate. And actually, with the roommate and everything in Spanish Harlem, it wasn't a nice apartment really, but
now you took a roommate. This is like saying that I took my Juris Doctorate, or
Well, there's a story to it. There was an African princess who was also hired as part of the trading class, the first trading class of this company in New York City.
Now, when you describe her as a princess, are you saying that she just was, she just had this effervescent quality about her, that she looked as if she could be royalty? She was very prim and proper.
No. She was legitimate royalty from Burkina Faso, which is, in fact, the poorest country in Africa. It has that distinction.
So you're the roommate. What was it? What was the verb you used? You selected? No, you took. You took an assistant fascist, basically.
Well, here's the thing. So I started work and I was looking. Oh no, I had rented this apartment, right? And I had an extra room. And is that how it happened? Yeah, that must have been how it happened. I must have just rented it and thought I would find a roommate later. And so then when I started on the first day of trading, when we were starting out.
To provide some context. So when at the time that you had taken the African princess, had you also taken wife?
Yes, she was in. Well, I wasn't married yet, but she was in France waiting on her paperwork.
You had taken a French Parisian, and then while in America, while waiting for the French Parisian, you had taken an African princess.
Yes, but it was platonic with the African princess. I invited her to take the extra room because she said she was looking for a place to live, and I said to her, "Well, I have an extra room. It's not a great apartment, but it's cheap. The rent must have been $1,200 a month. I feel like, or $1,000 a month." And so we were splitting the rent. And I mean, to live in New York City for $500 a month and to actually have your own room, and it was not a big place, but it was big enough. And that was a pretty good deal. It actually allowed me to save money every month. I mean, I wasn't saving much, but I was saving a little bit.
You're one of these hoity-toity multicultural guys. I mean, you go to France, you take a Cambodian, French girl, then you move to Spanish Harlem when no one lives there. Probably everything's coming off of rent control. They're going from $200 rents to $1,000 rents. And as your roommate, instead of choosing some drunk Irish guy, you choose an African princess.
Well, she was quite an interesting person. Her father, I say princess. I'm not sure she was total royalty, but she was pretty close. Her father was head of the central bank in Burkina Faso. And she had not lived in Burkina Faso for a while because there had been her father got in some trouble. He got in some trouble for some of his wheeling and dealing at the central bank of Burkina Faso, and was forced to flee the country with his family. But she grew up. She literally grew up with
genocide
servants.
and wealth.
Servants, white gloved servants who took care of everything in the house. And so I think Spanish Harlem was quite a shock for her. And it was kind of, I think she kind of considered it to be kind of slumming. It was this American impoverished life that she heard about, and it appealed to her in a way. But eventually, eventually after the apartment got robbed, that was when she vowed she would never go back. Yeah, I didn't want to go back either when the apartment got robbed. It sucks to get robbed, especially when you live in an area you're the only white face. Everybody knows you there. Yeah, the story of the robbery is quite interesting. I came home.
Is there anything you could have done differently to prevent the robbery? Could you have locked your windows better? Could you have locked your doors?
Yeah, I could have.
Could you put an alarm system?
Happened. Well, I wasn't going to put an alarm system in, but the thief must have been someone who was in one of the apartments facing my apartment, because it was kind of the windows on the interior faced other windows of different buildings, so it was kind of like a courtyard, but it wasn't really shared. It wasn't really a courtyard for one building. It was just the buildings between the blocks, and the outer window of my room. The window, I guess, was not locked. And so this thief, very enterprising, very desperate, used the electrical wires hanging between the buildings to literally swing all the way along the side of the building and catch like the ledge of that window. So he was swinging over a 4-foot drop to the ground on this wire, catch the window, pull the window down, and then climb in through my bedroom window to get into the apartment. And then, interestingly enough, the first thing that he did was he went to the fire escape area and he opened that window. And that was going to be like his secondary. He was a very thoughtful thief, so that would have been his secondary escape. Like if I were to come to the door, he could flee out that window and get down the fire escape. But anyway, when I came home and I was really drunk. And I remember my door was kind of unlocked. My door was unlocked. Yeah, it was unlocked and a little bit open. I was so wasted.
He ended up going out the front door when he realized the coast was clear.
Yeah,
he realized that the fire escape would have drawn too much attention, or perhaps took more effort, or perhaps he just had a lot of shit. Maybe he invited someone else.
He didn't have a lot of shit. He took jewelry from the Burkina Faso girl, and he took my laptop, which incidentally contained all of my writing from Paris and Europe. And so that was the only thing I lost. But at the time I didn't know about the jewelry because the girl wasn't there. And at first I thought maybe she had left
Wait. Hold on. Did you have a backup?
No. Well, no. I had no backup. I had a couple things were in a.
How did you? I mean, you published a book, or at least some stories about Paris. Did you have to recreate that? Did you lose your entire journal? You lost all your journals from.
I basically lost. I was working on a book of short stories, and I lost that book, with the exception of probably like 4 or 5 earlier versions of those stories. So I had to rework them.
This sounds as painful as that one wooden building where all the John Coltrane reel-to-reel tapes were burned.
Burned to the ground.
Yeah, they didn't even think to store it in a concrete basement in some nondescript industrial complex.
Yeah, well, no, it was the history of those recordings. There's even worse stories which are not fire related. Like there's stories where like some guy said, "Oh, we need to make some space for our new recordings. Oh, what do we have here? We have all these old master copies of classic jazz albums. Well, let's just use these tapes, erase them, and then we can use them to make new recordings."
Oh God, they recorded over Charlie Parker. They recorded over John Coltrane. They recorded over Thelonious Monk. They recorded over Don Cherry. They recorded over Andrew Hill. My God! And what did they? It'd be funny to see actually what they recorded. Now, if it was good outlaw country, there'd be a great irony of that.
No,
but it was probably fucking disco.
These are decisions. These are decisions that happened in like the 80s and the 90s. They're just like, that doesn't matter. But I mean, to this day, the record labels lie about their master copies. They really keep that a guarded secret. Impulse, which doesn't really exist anymore, but the people that have the supposed tapes of Impulse, they have never been forthright about what was destroyed in the fire, because they may in the future want to release new copies of old albums, and they don't want people to say, "Oh, that's not the original master that it was made from." They're very secretive about all that stuff to protect themselves.
This has got more intrigue than an overthrow of Zembla.
But listen to this. I lost this computer, and I didn't know it at the time, though. So I was drunk, and I'm sitting in the apartment, and there's all these dirty handprints all over the walls. And I was so drunk, and I'm just looking at them, and I'm thinking to myself, God, that is odd. Why are all these dirty handprints on the walls? What is going on here? And then I thought, and then I saw the fire escape window was open, and then as drunk as I was, it all was apparent to me. Someone's gotten into the apartment somehow, and at first I thought they came in through the fire escape, and I thought, how could that have happened? That's all locked up right there. And then I went to my room, and I saw the far window that was over the courtyard, 4 stories over the courtyard, was open. And so I called the police, and the police came.
Now, what time of night was this? When you probably started your drinking back then, probably by about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So was this 10 o'clock we're talking about, or is this very late at night?
Yeah. I don't think this was really a crazy late hour. So it was probably like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And so the police came, and the police were laughing at me. They're like, what was stolen? And at this time, I didn't know the computer had been taken, and I just didn't see anything that was stolen. And I said, I don't know if anything's been stolen. Maybe I scared the thief and he ran off. And they're like, nah, I don't think so, because you said the front door was open, right? And anyway, so the cops were laughing, but there was one cop who wasn't laughing, and he pulled me aside from the rest of them that thought this was really funny, and he said, really. Take a very close look at your apartment. Think about all the things you own. Do you have a computer? Do you have... And I said, yeah. So I looked and I saw, my laptop's gone. And he goes, see, there's probably some more things taken. You just don't know. Do you have a roommate? And I said, yeah. Anyway, but she wasn't home, so I didn't know her jewelry had been taken. But not all of her jewelry. When she did come, not all of her jewelry had been taken.
The crown jewels of Burkina Faso were stolen.
Yes, that had probably been stolen by her family anyway. So it was probably fitting. These jewels were returned to the poor.
I mean, this is probably a 10,000-year-old crown going back to the cradle of civilization.
a scepter, an ancient scepter. So anyway, so she never wanted to come back to the apartment after that. And so strangely enough, her sister, who was a poet, she moved into the room because she wasn't living there at the time, and she lived there for a while. And then finally, she moved out, and I took a final roommate, another trader, who was this very small trumpet-playing Asian youth. And he didn't even have a bed. He would just sleep on the floor, and he would practice his trumpet by just playing the mouthpiece. And so he never spoke, never spoke. But you'd hear him in his room going...
He would speak to you through his trumpet. He would speak to you through his trumpet, in other words.
Yeah, I guess he was working on his embouchure, keeping his chops good, and that's what he would do. And in the mornings, very strangely, he would stand by the door and wait for me. And we'd take the 6 train from 116th Street down to Grand Central. And he would wait for me, and he would walk behind me to the train station and sit beside me on the train and go all the way to work, and then follow me up to the elevator, go up the elevator, go to the trading floor, and follow me the whole way and never say a word to me. He would never say a word.
It's like the perfect house pet.
He paid his rent on time, and it was just great. It was just great. And but anyway, with getting back to the robbery though, it was very strange. The super of the building, this Puerto Rican guy, comes up to me, and he goes, "Yeah, I heard about what happened. I heard about what happened, man." He goes, "I don't like that happen in my building, man. I'm gonna fuck them up, man. I know who they are. I'm gonna find them. And I'm like, "Wait, you know who they are?" He goes, "Yeah, I find them, man. You tell me, I find them." I said, "Wait, who is it?" He goes, man, I can find them. I know I can find them, man. I can find them for you." And I was like, I just let it go. I just let it go. But it was, I didn't know if he was in on it or what. I mean, he very well could have been the person who left the window open, and that information was used when maybe that was the thing. Leave a window open in an apartment that's going to be rented, and somebody doesn't actually see that and lock it up, and then you can rob them later. I don't know, but it was tricky. There was some shenanigans. I felt like there was some shenanigans, and it's a pretty uncomfortable feeling when you feel like people who robbed you may be just watching you. They might be sitting in their apartment with your shit from across the way.
So suddenly you had to treat your gear as if you were in Alaska. I mean, either it was on your person or it was locked up in a locker off-site, but you realized that to have anything valuable in your apartment was just kind of a sucker's game.
Yeah, I didn't really have anything valuable, just beyond a laptop. I had a few records, but nobody steals records, at least then. And it wasn't that big a deal. It was just uncomfortable knowing that the thieves likely were living really close to you. I mean, the thief didn't come from somewhere else.
Yeah, and they had very poor hygiene.
Yeah, I didn't. Well, and then the worst thing was the cop who told me to look at my stuff. He said to me, he said, "Look, I could dust for fingerprints all these handprints on the wall and see what comes up." He said, "Do you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, why don't you do that?" He goes, "Well, look, I'm just warning you. You can clean those handprints probably off the wall pretty easily. But when I dust with the duster, it's gonna be a mess." And so I told him to do it anyway, right? And so for the rest of the apartment, you couldn't clean these. The handprints went away, but you couldn't clean away the cops' dusting stuff. So there are these big blotchy, dusted areas. You can still see the handprint a little bit, but
so it created the ambiance of a permanent crime scene.
Yeah. He should have put some crime tape up, and I could have just lived like that. Police line, do not cross. I should just, it would have been great. And so there was a police report, and I mean, of course, I never heard anything. I think the only way in New York, I had that was my first encounter with the police over something that happened to me. The next encounter was the one time I got punched in the head. I got cold clocked. The police came for that one. And they thought it was funny. The detectives thought it was funny. I mean, they were like, "Yeah, you got you pretty good. All right. What do you want to do? What do you want to do?" I'm like, "Well, what do you guys do? I mean, don't you do a police report?" He goes, "Yeah, you want to do a police report? All right. And I mean, none of these things ever come to anything.
So they write down on a pad of paper, guy got clocked pretty good in the eye. And
I mean, but there's nothing they could really do anyway. They're like, "Oh, you know what the guy looked like?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, Hey, where do you want to go? You want to come over to the station house and look through pictures, mugshots? Maybe you identify him?" I'm like, yeah, not really. Because they would just, basically they're going to sit you down at the station. They're going to give you books and books and books of mugshots. And you're just going to sit there looking at pictures. You're not, I mean, it's never going anywhere. It's never going anywhere at all.
And most of those mugshots were just cut out from, magazines, Men's Health, Outdoor. Yeah,
I'm like, that's the guy who did it. Who? Michael Jackson?
Yeah,
that's Michael Jackson.
Larceny Today. Yeah, just I remember I was supposed to go to an MIA concert. Remember?
We were supposed to go, I think.
Yeah,
but I was too messed up. My whole face was messed up.
She
Yeah.
was this.
My whole eye.
She was this
My eye
pretty
was all
pretty
blood
young
in it.
Sri Lankan singer at the time before she got famous.
Yeah, she did what all those revolutionary girls do. She married a billionaire, had a baby, and then got divorced and kept the money and the baby. That's what she did. She married this guy whose father was a hedge fund guy who bought Sony Records, I think, or something. Bronfman. He's got like he had a son, and she married the son.
Well, she looked me directly in the eyes, and I think we had a connection. And I think if I had talked to her after the concert, I would have been that guy.
Yeah, she would ask you about your bank account. I mean, she's a hardcore revolutionary, or at least that's what she projected. But, she was in need of funds for the revolution.
She would travel with her. She had this African gal who would be her dancer, and they really wouldn't wear
the hype girl.
Yeah,
She's the hype
and
girl, hype man.
they would wear like the same outfit for every show, and she was very talented, very cute. I thought, if you were feeling better that night, I think that you would have taken her like you took the African princess and the Parisian.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was an interesting time back then. That was a different New York. I understand New York's very different now, especially Spanish Harlem, which at that time, literally, if you went above 96th Street, you were in Spanish Harlem, and there weren't banks. There was nothing. All it was little Mexican panaderias. But this part of Spanish Harlem had once been an outpost of Italians. And so there was still this old Italian bread shop on 116th Street. Really cool little place. And there was also an old Italian guy who cut hair. And I once went to this guy. This guy was ancient. He was so old. He must have been there since the great heyday of the Italians in this part of Manhattan. And he cut my hair with a big straight edge razor. And the haircut was only $2.50.
Now he must have used scissors at some point, right? I mean, did he finish off with it?
No, never used scissors. Did the whole haircut with a straight edge razor.
Jesus Christ.
And I didn't have long hair. I mean, I had a normal haircut, but he was able to fashion a beautiful haircut with just a straight edge.
This guy sounds like one of these mafia torture cleaner guys.
He probably could have been.
He normally starts with most of his clients. He puts your head in a vice first.
Yeah,
so you don't twitch.
Clamps down your toes. No, this guy was great. A very thick Italian accent, and the haircut was $2.50. It's the cheapest haircut I ever had in my life. I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine he had many customers, at least from the neighborhood.
No, not if he says he's only going to use a straight edge.
Yeah, that would scare.
A lot of trust. A lot of trust in that haircut. Jesus Christ, New York City. You moved all the way down from Spanish Harlem to you got lucky, right? You moved to what do they call it? Gramercy Park.
Gramercy Park.
Park.
I mean, I got lucky. I got lucky that 9/11 happened. 9/11 happened, and it was just when my lease, I think, was about ready to let up. And all of the apartment prices dropped. They dropped so much because people at that time thought that Manhattan was finished. And so it was a great time. It was a great time to move to a neighborhood that people wanted to live in.
That's when Brooklyn took off. Didn't they think that being across the East River would somehow make them safe?
Well, Brooklyn had been starting to take off when you were there about 4 years earlier and stayed. You actually stayed at I think it was the second L stop in Brooklyn. So you weren't at the very prestigious. Yeah, it was already getting started to get developed. The first L stop.
I think it was the Bedford stop. I can't remember.
Was it Bedford? Oh, then you were at the first stop. You were at the first L train stop.
It might have been Bedford? At the second one. It's been so long, but rent was for this tiny 2-bedroom that was right adjacent to the BQE, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. The pillars went deep into the ground. You have to put pillars probably 20 feet into the ground, and it would shake my building constantly. kind of like from that scene in the Blues Brothers where they're right up against the L, and their building's shaking constantly. And he said, "Does the L go by very often?" He says, "Yeah, so often you don't even notice it." And that was the same thing with the BQE. I kind of was shell shocked into this somnambulent sleep after about a week because it just kept rattling the building. But rent was $780, and you could get an actual studio, one of those loft studios where artists actually used to rent the studios to do actual artwork for $1,000. And so you'd have couples who would guy and a gal would live together, and maybe they had a job as like a school teacher, and then on the weekends they would spend the weekend painting. And so there were actual artists living in Brooklyn. Not starving artists, working artists, and but things were very cheap. So it was a totally different Brooklyn. It was before the term hipster came about. I mean, it was predominantly hipsters, but they were not very aware of themselves as hipsters. They just were just living kind of on the margins of Manhattan.
Well, that was also the time when. I don't know if they still do it. I haven't really been. I didn't even really go to Brooklyn when I lived in Manhattan. But that was the time when you were there, where the old Italian families would go out and sit out at night outside and talk to each other. It was the old community. And
lawn chairs at 4:30 every day. They put out their lawn chairs, and if they didn't know you, they'd stare a hole through you.
Yeah, exactly. And the other aspect to that Brooklyn, which no longer exists, is that. At that time, if you crossed Metropolitan Avenue, you had officially entered Bushwick, which was the poor black section, and you were in trouble if you went into Bushwick. And I always remembered there was a Gang Starr, the rap group, and they had a song where something about Bush quick, you'll get mush quick, or something like that. And it's just Bushwick scared the hell out of me. There was also Bushwick Bill. There was a lot of reasons to be scared of Bushwick. And I remember I was shooting pool one night, like 2002 or 2003. Well, it was probably like 2003, 2004, down in the East Village. And this guy I was shooting pool with, I said, "Well, so where do you live?" He goes, "I live in Bushwick." I'm like, "What? You don't live in Bushwick? You're crazy, man. You can't live there." He goes, Yeah, I live in Bushwick. A lot of people live in Bushwick. I said, "Really?" And even then, like, things were changing, really changing quickly. I mean, now Bushwick, it has none of that past, no doubt. It's probably a very expensive place to live.
Yeah, only time I was quote unquote held up in my life was in Bushwick.
You got held? You got robbed?
Well, I mean, I couldn't have been robbed of very much, but no, they didn't take anything. So Jamie, my roommate, is a guy. I didn't take African princesses. I kind of took what was available. He was a
Jewish New York intellectual.
Jewish New York intellectual. Had his PhD in literature, and it was 2 a.m. We had gone to one of these loft parties and just gotten tremendously lost. And a kid, the knife he pulled on us was like a replica of a samurai sword that you could put in the palm of your hand. And so he pulled it out. It was more like a letter opener. So it would be like a bad shanking if you didn't defend yourself.
Dull?
Yeah, and
very dull blade.
He pulled it and he pointed it at Jamie because he had asked us for a cigarette. I gave him a cigarette. I gave him a Nat Sherman. He said, "Oh, these are one of those fancy cigarettes. You buy this at the Village? Did you buy this at the Village?" And I kept saying, "Yeah, I bought it at the Village." He kept saying, "You buy it at the Village?" And then after I gave him the cigarette, he asked for a quarter, and that was at which point we tried to walk away, and he pulled this knife. And Jamie's response was, at this time of night, I often think about our mothers and sisters sleeping, and I'm thinking, Jamie, where are you going with this story? He's gonna start knifing you. And I kind of grabbed him by the arm, and we walked away. And he said, "That guy doesn't know who he's messing with." I guess the Jewish intellectual was also some Taekwondo expert, and
he's probably Bugsy Siegel's great nephew.
Yeah,
connected.
Yeah, and but I was pretty. I was under the influence of a couple of things, so I thought it was kind of funny. I was very very calm about it, and he said you were very calm, and I said I was just really tired, really wasn't aware of what was going on, and we walked back. But Bushwick was a tough place, and there were black parts of that area, there were Latin parts of that area. I can't remember what the demarcation lines were, but people felt.
Well, I know it was Metropolitan Avenue. There was a subway stop on Metropolitan. Yeah, you must have been living on Metropolitan, because I remember going to this. I think there's a subway stop Metropolitan on the L, and you could either get in on the Bushwick side, or you could get in on you could go down into it on the side that is Italian side, and it was kind of important that because when you exit the subway, you never really know which side of the street you're on. It could be very confusing. So you didn't want to end up on the Bushwick side, because I think Metropolitan was kind of a big road, a big street. It might be hard to cross if you had to get back over to the other side of the street. I don't know. I could have all this wrong. It's been a long time.
There were a lot of taxis. There's a lot of taxis that wouldn't go to that part of it. You'd have to get a gypsy taxi. And most of the time, they might drop you off there, but they probably wouldn't pick you up there.
Oh, yeah.
But I lived in
I
lived on Wither Street. I lived on Wither Street in Williamsburg. And I'd never been in New York before.
I think your street appeared in that Donnie Brasco movie. That was right off Withers, I think.
It also appeared in the introduction to the Sopranos. Not Withers Street, but down the street from Withers, there was something called the Pork Store. It was an Italian butcher shop. I'm nearly positive that Pork Store, at least for a couple seasons, appeared in the segue into the Sopranos.
Is that the store like where they were meeting in the back or something?
You know, that's funny. I don't know if the Pork Store was actually ever used as a place to meet in the back, but there were a lot of convenience stores that did very little business. The prices were okay. They had a lot of cold cuts, but just you'd think that they wouldn't stay in business. And I think a lot of these places were fronts. And I saw a lot of strange arguments in these convenience stores. One time I went in, I think I was just getting toilet paper, maybe some dish detergent or something like that. And a guy...
You mean bodegas. Bodegas.
Yeah.
Called in New York.
Yeah, it was a bodega. And there was definitely a mafia type guy, probably in his early 40s or something like that. Very, very polite to me, very nice. And I'd asked him a couple of questions about how much this was. That was another thing. There were no prices. They had all kinds of stuff, cans of soup, but nothing had prices on it. And when you'd ask him the price, he'd shoot back a very reasonable price, almost as if he just wanted people to buy things, so it looked like there was commerce going at his store. But you'd get away with a big bag of groceries for great prices. But this old guy comes in, probably about 70, and he asks if he's got Pall Mall on filters or something. And unlike the treatment he was giving me, which was, yes, sir, it's over there, sir, absolutely, how you doing, buddy? He said to this guy immediately, fuck you. And said that about, 4 times. Just fuck you. And I think the conversation was no fuck you, no fuck you. And then the old guy walked out. So there must have been some tension, I'm thinking. There was a hidden transcript that I wasn't able to decipher, but yeah, I didn't want to ask for cigarettes at that store because could have triggered something.
Well, that's the one thing about New York, though, is that at least back in those times, all the stores were just little shops that were run by real people, not corporate people, not hourly workers. And so these corner stores would know all the people that came in, because you didn't have a supermarket that was near you. I mean, there are not a lot of supermarkets. Like you live. Maybe there are now more supermarkets.
No, there was nothing. There wasn't even a tiny little Aldi or a little. There wasn't even a Walgreens. There certainly wasn't a Walmart. They didn't even have Whole Foods or anything like that.
No, I mean, I remember all the time I lived in New York, I had to walk. I probably had to walk like at least 6 or 7 blocks from the Spanish Harlem place to the supermarket and back, or from the place in Gramercy Park. I had to walk to it was almost in Union Square that I had to go to the supermarket. And so you had to carry all the groceries back with you, heavy groceries. So, I mean, that was just one of the features of living in New York. It was a lot of walking blocks and blocks.
Oh,
and
yeah. You get sweaty. Oh, God.
Yeah. During the summertime, the plastic bags are cutting into your fingers. You got to keep going. Carrying all this milk and water. And
do you remember the history of alcohol purchases in New York between when you would visit? Do you remember our alcohol purchases?
I don't remember.
So I hadn't turned 21, and I was regularly buying 6-packs in New York and going to bars and getting served. I was busy, so I wasn't really going out and doing that kind of thing. But I don't think there was a local liquor store nearby, and I think I had just turned 21, and we wanted to go and get some beer, and the only thing that was close by was a liquor warehouse. And these guys rented and sold us a keg. And we certainly didn't show any. We might have had to show IDs. No, I don't even think they cared about where we lived. They're
was this when we got a small keg? It wasn't one of the big ones?
Yeah, we got a pony keg. And we didn't have to fill out any forms. They said, yeah, you just bring it back. Bring it back. We'll find you if you don't bring it back. And because I doubt you'd go into an Italian liquor distribution place in Brooklyn with the intent to steal the keg.
Well, they're probably like, where do you live? You told them where you lived. I live around the corner on Withers. But bring it back. Because I mean, that was the attitude of New York then. If you live in the neighborhood, it doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in. You say you live in that neighborhood, or people see you a couple times and they talk to you a little bit and they know you live there. Then you're like a neighbor. And people have this impression that a big city like New York is really impersonal and no one cares about you. That's not true at all. You're like 4 or 5 blocks that you live around. Those are all people that you see frequently. Everyone in the little stores and bodegas knows you. So it's not a surprise that someone at a liquor warehouse would give you a pony keg and be like, yeah, bring it back when you're done. You live around here, so no big deal.
We had a really hard time finishing the keg because I think we were still going out to Manhattan. I mean, we weren't really hanging out in Brooklyn. So we'd have to get loaded up in Brooklyn and then go to Manhattan. And then we'd probably spend the whole night in Manhattan, then come back and then try to finish up the beer. Do you remember, a couple of things. That wasn't the first alcohol purchase. The first alcohol purchase, I think it was the day of my birthday. And we bought a 3-liter jug of... what's that stuff? It's like a white wine you mix with other drinks to make kir. Vermouth. Vermouth.
Oh, vermouth?
Jesus.
What, vermouth?
Yeah, man. We finished off a jug of...
Well, vermouth's not for kir. That kir comes with... it's a syrup, creme de cassis syrup.
Okay.
You can't drink that straight, though, creme de cassis syrup. Vermouth you can drink straight.
Yeah.
Is that what we were drinking?
Yeah, we made the mistake of drinking vermouth straight.
No, it's not a mistake. That's a great drink. I like vermouth. Straight vermouth? It's pretty good.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure about the quality. I think we were going for quantity.
Maybe we bought like a generic label of vermouth, not a martini and rossi.
But one of those nights, I think we went into this one club because we were on our feet all day, and I think we were just tired. And this place had nice couches, and they had a DJ. Didn't look very crowded. I think later on the night they began to charge a $10 cover, which was pretty high. Do you remember the crowd that began to fill in?
Wait, was this that place? I think we were in the West Village, and I think the place was called Bar Doe.
Yeah,
I think it's a gay place. I think it's a transvestite or a gay place or something.
Right,
I don't know.
Right, but
I vaguely remember that.
And we're sitting there,
that
and
place
we're
still there.
Yeah,
I think it's still there.
We're sitting there and we're drinking cocktails, and all these girls begin pouring in, and
oh no, lesbians!
And all of them were really good looking, Latinas and black chicks and half chicks and white chicks, and they were spinning vinyl, and then the place was packed, and we had gotten in early, probably like 4 o'clock. They started charging a cover probably around 8 or 9. And these girls are buying us drinks. They're sitting next to us. They're kissing us on the cheek. And then if it can't get any better, two strippers get up on podiums. And there are these hot lesbian girls dancing topless in thongs. And we're the only guys in the entire bar. We're the only fucking guys in the entire bar.
Yeah.
There was no line to the men's room, or at least maybe they were using it. But we had somehow, and then we roll out of there at around 2 or 2:30, and somehow managed to get a subway back to Brooklyn. And there's this old black guy sitting next to us, and we're kind of rehearsing the night and saying, "Do you remember when the strippers came out? Do you remember when the lesbians came out?" And what did he say about the lesbians? He said,
those lesbians, they get your balls, man.
They get your balls. Yeah.
They grab you the balls. They get your balls. I remember that. Yeah. You know what? That's why we were waiting at the L train, because we probably took the L train all the way to the West Village and got off on like 8th Avenue or something, because that's where that place was. It was over in the West Village where the streets don't run, like they don't really run east-west anymore. They kind of run at an angle. It gets kind of confusing over there because it's the old New York. But yeah, that's where that was. And it's a shame we didn't actually know. Well, there wasn't the internet then, so it was kind of hard to know about places to go. But not far from there was a famous bar called Chumley's, which was an old speakeasy, and you couldn't. It was just there's just a number on the street, and that's how you know that you're at Chumley's. There's no sign or anything. They keep it as in a speakeasy style, but it's always been a speakeasy, and it's a pretty famous place. And I don't think that was too far away, but of course that's not in the gay part. Back when we went there though, that was I think that area's always been gay, but that was the kind of the peak intensity of the gay stuff going on.
I remember for some reason I was very much against pissing outside in the city. I just thought, New York always smells like piss. I don't want to be one of those guys that pisses. And I remember we were going from one place to another, and you just stood against a wall and started pissing on this wall, and there's nothing I could do. I couldn't really protest, but I think by the end of the time I lived in New York, I finally kind of broke my code, and I started pissing in alleys and pissing on the side of the wall. I learned.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty nasty thing to do, and especially in the summertime with the heat, it just stinks so bad, that piss. And one of my trader friends got busted pissing one night. The cop got him, and he had to go to like alcohol class or something to not have it on his record for the public urination.
They make you go to alcohol class because they assume that it's beer that's making you piss.
Well, I think the charge probably was public urination, and also another charge for public intoxication, drunkenness, which is the more serious charge. I think that it's just like a simple misdemeanor.
I mean, you could get charged in New York if you're a trader and they read your resume, they'd charge you for both of those things.
Yeah. They should. Yeah, you should. That's part of the job description for a trader is public drunkenness.
Operation of derivatives while intoxicated.
Yeah, that was a lot of drinking that went on, and I mean, but I think that's what happens in New York. You go to New York when you're in your 20s, and you spend your whole time there drinking and eating out. And I'm sure people continue to do the same thing, but they now have like 3 or 4 roommates. You got to find like 3 or 4 African princesses if you want to make it and pay the rent. It's a different world.
New York encourages consumption and spending. I mean, it's famous for being a place of banks, but the banks don't have to save to get their capital. The banks just get fiat currency. So everything is
the banks just take a few pennies out of every transaction that ever happens. That's one of the things about, the whole system really only functions very well if money has velocity. And that means just money is moving around. Because these fucking banks just want money to move. Because they are standing in every transaction and just taking a tiny piece out of everything that ever happens. whether it's interest payments or pass through or fees or whatever. And that's the nature of that system. I mean, they just own the casino. And so the velocity of money it just serves them. Just make money move. Just keep it moving, and they'll become very wealthy. It's just it's unfortunate. Those banker guys are not really traders. They call themselves traders, but they're not. They're not traders. They're just taking a little tiny slice off everything that happens. That's all.
They pile in something after it's become popular, and then they get blown out of the water once there's a reversal, like that short fix trade.
Oh, yeah. You know what's interesting is I don't even know what's going on in the world right now. Like about a month ago, I stopped looking at any news. Whether it's sports or New York Times or anything. I mean, anything where I could pick up news about markets or the world. So in the last month, I have no idea what's happened at all. But strangely enough, I was using, a smartphone. So you carry this device with you that has access to all this content and information. And I realized what it was causing. It was causing me to click on stuff, and all this clicking, after an hour or so of the clicking and the all this content flashing before your eyes, it's very addictive. And once you start clicking, you can never stop clicking. And so I just stopped it. And the first thing that happened to me was my attention span immediately increased to what it had been a long time ago. And I read very quickly. I read a couple books. I had no problem just reading and being focused. And I think there's a transformation going on in people because of these devices and all of this easy access to information, whether or not it's good information or bad information, it doesn't matter. It's just the ease of access, and that once you start clicking, you never stop clicking. Once you start swiping, you never stop swiping.
You really can't feel you really can't feel solitude unless you're completely away from a smartphone.
And you carry this device. You carry this device in your pocket that could do all of this. And people. I understand why people are addicted to it, but the consequences of this addiction are not really yet known. I've speculated that autism is one of the consequences, but I mean, maybe there are others. But anyway, so I stopped with all this. So I have no idea what's happened in the world in the last 4 months. I have no idea. Well, actually, I do. I think there was a school shooting. I think there was what else? Oh, I do know one other thing, that the Loyola Ramblers of Chicago are going to the Final Four. That's the only thing I know. And that apparently recently happened, but I heard that. And I'm sure Trump did some things which 50% of America doesn't like. That's all I know.
Joe Rogan talks a lot about news, and I think maybe he gets a lot of eyeballs, but he'll also just talk about the past. I mean, these guys, the last one I listened to, these guys talked for 3 hours about comedy in the 80s, comedy clubs in the 80s, and how they got started. And I think that nostalgia or talking about the past is a good way to ignore all the noise currently. Just to focus on something that was pre-internet.
Well, one of the strange features of this internet is that with all the content out there, people are struggling to be viewed. And so everything is presented so hyperbolically. It's so over the top. And that desensitizes people too for the things that literally are important, that should be over the top. If they're not presented over the top, they're ignored. And there once was a time, though, before all this, that things happened and you'd hear about them and they would have gravitas because for one thing, they couldn't be replaced with some new thing that happened. You'd have to sit and live with something that happened for a little while. Now you're just immediately replacing something with the next event. And it's all presented so hyperbolically that it must be causing spikes in cortisone levels and people, and they get used to it. It's its own kind of thrill.
That is the addiction. There was this guy interviewed on Rogan recently, and Rogan was making fun of him, and he's friends with this guy, and this guy lives in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, where it's -40 during the winter. So the guy's chosen to live in a very rural environment, very tough environment, but he's addicted to Twitter. and he's a comedian, so Twitter is kind of part of his marketing scheme. But he said that he stays up at night with these adrenaline flows when he's getting into these Twitter fights. So and Rogan gave him very good advice. He said, don't allow your emotional well-being to be in the hands of people who are anonymous and who wish to destroy you, because all they're trying to do is they're trying to go down this emotional path. They disagree with you on some subject, and they're going to find every weakness. All these anonymous people are going to find some weakness, and they'll keep attacking you. And he used the term when the battle is going horizontal, step to the side. So if you're not winning, just bow out, just ignore them. But yeah, it's a totally different way of interacting with this anonymous simulacra, and you get this jolt, this endorphin rush or this cortisol rush, and so there is no history. There is no history of this, and so it could be burning out the attention span of people at a very quick rate. They might be left with a total rewiring of the brain and incapable of sustained thinking.
Well, it certainly, if Twitter, it's hard to generalize, obviously, but with the limits of Twitter, that it's 140 characters, but yet Twitter is a place of argumentation. It seems like everything breaks out into big arguments. So you're limited in terms of your argument. You got 140 characters to express some argument. And I imagine the people probably writing are not able to use 140 characters to express themselves with any kind of nuance, even if they were capable of it. So what you get are just emotional, over-the-top responses, probably, and plus that's what draws attention, right?
Well,
so that the whole hyperbolic stuff.
Yeah, you just put in capital letters. Very sad, very sad.
Yeah, but people feel a thrill from having a lot of people look at something and like it or view it, and that has become now the measure of whether something is truthful or a good argument or something. It's about the attention it gets. Whether it's good or bad attention, it doesn't really matter. It's just about getting attention. The measure of truth wasn't always about attention. It was that you were trying to figure something out and have a nuanced argument to get somewher.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Socrates had to drink hemlock. I mean, he wasn't getting likes.
Yeah. Well, but there's there's been some interesting discussion too. There's this guy that does the Dilbert comics. He's a very interesting guy, Scott Adams, I think his name is. And he said, he was talking about Trump with somebody, and he said, well, you're not understanding Trump. It doesn't matter that Trump says things which aren't true and which are obviously not true. What Trump is saying is emotionally true. And that is the truth level that his followers are connecting with him at. Not the factually true thing. That's irrelevant. But emotional truth is more important. And that seems to be the way a lot of things operate. That's why you have this seems to be these big breakdowns between the left and the right. A lot of that is the hyperbole, and the content has to, make itself really strongly on one side or really strongly on the other. But these people all feel emotional about their side. And it's that emotion which is truer than any argument. They share this outrage. They share this anger. And that is the truth component. So, I mean, Plato and Socrates would have no chance talking to anybody today. I mean, people aren't interested in really talking about stuff. They want to feel stuff. It's about feelings. That is truth. It's what I feel.
Yeah, there's a distrust for logical discourse, for spelling out your premises and offering reason to support your views. I don't think anybody has the patience for that. And in fact, in these debates, people cut off one another, and they'll pander to the crowd, and they'll encourage the crowd to heckle someone's attempt to offer premises for their beliefs. And so I think the very concept of offering reason for opinions and ideas is lost to the attention span of Twitter and YouTube, and yeah, it's kind of gone. But there could be a resurgence, though. Because if they're just filling themselves with this junk food, they're going to crash and burn fairly quickly.
I really don't know. I think more than likely, though, the technology itself and the platforms which have been created, they support, you have the limits of the platforms and the technology, which creates this level of discourse. And I know that the Zuckerberg guys talked about, well, we want to try and make Facebook more of this, more of that. All these Silicon Valley people, they don't let their kids use any of the stuff that they operate, the platforms or the technologies. I mean, it's crazy. These people have created this extremely addictive technology, and they've made it purposefully addictive, and they don't allow their own family members to use it because they know how bad it is and what it's going to do to them.
Fundamental learning begins with paper and pencil. Fundamental mathematics, reading and writing. You don't need a laptop. You don't need a computer.
Look, but in anything, we're talking about technologies. I remember, there was outrage with Plato, when he said, I'm going to write down philosophy. That was considered to be an outrageous act in Greece at the time, to use this technology of writing about philosophical ideas. Because prior to that, philosophy was something that you talked about. You'd walk around and you'd talk to some master, and he would talk to you, and it was like what Socrates was doing. Socrates never wrote anything down, and so you had the technology transforming thinking and affecting thinking. And I don't really see what's happening now with the internet or Facebook or Twitter. It's really no different. It's another further technological transformation of man. And the first one, though, was paper and pencil, or whatever they were using, whatever Plato was using. There's that, you remember that McLuhan guy who said the medium is the message. Really, the technology, it's not about transmitting something.
Who's this
guy? It's just about further encouraging you to use the technology.
Who's this guy? The medium is the message. Who is this guy?
Marshall McLuhan.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I can't.
Right, yeah.
He was a colleague of Edmund Carpenter. And apparently, Edmund Carpenter is responsible for a lot of the important stuff that McLuhan wrote. Because McLuhan, I guess he had a brain aneurysm, was in the hospital, and he published this very important work during that time. And it was written by Edmund Carpenter, but Edmund Carpenter took no credit for it. But he was the one who wrote it. But I think McLuhan said the medium is the message. I mean, this guy he realized the history of technology was really about technology. It was never about the content of technology. It's just about the technology itself. So television is not about the programs. Television is about the actual television. That's what it's encouraging you, to watch more television. So Twitter is just encouraging you to use more Twitter. You're not actually having an argument with anyone or resolving anything. You're just using Twitter. That's just what you're doing. Well, that's it.
This seems to be the battle of humans against something. I mean, it seems like there's two tendencies. You have we've talked about the two types of gods: the personal gods with the helping and hurting spirits, and then these transcendental, otherworldly gods, the omnipotent, omniscient, eternal forces. And I wonder if human beings have a intrinsic vulnerability to being in awe of something that is very much outside themselves, and so they'll.
Well, I've been thinking about something along these lines, and it relates exactly back to all these arguments on the internet or whatever it is, and the idea is pretty simple one. It's about the idea of something local versus something general and sort of nebulous. And like you take the Inuits' language, for instance. Their language is all local and specific. There isn't any debate possible within that language in a philosophical way because they don't have general concepts. It's all local knowledge. And so you can't debate any of that. There's no arguments to be had. But if you have a language that's filled with general ideas which are open to different definitions, and you have the ability to generalize second and third order magnitudes of generalizations based on these generalizations, and you start to invent words and adding new words to your language because you live in a virtual world of computers and generalities. I mean, it starts to become infinite, the amount of stuff you can just pull out of nowhere and create. And that just muddies up any kind of argument, but it also gives the possibility for the shysters and the fraudsters to come in and to create words and to create definitions and to transform dialogues and shift and move things in directions that they want to, and to change perceptions. But you could never do that if language was purely local, and if people really had local places in which they lived, where they knew their neighbors, and the words that they shared were all parts of their physical lives. But now we live in a virtual world where, you have all this stuff which is undefined or ill-defined. And that leaves it open to corporations to come in and define things, and governments. It's a very dangerous time in that sense, because everything is debatable. Everything is up for debate. And so perhaps that's why people turn to emotional truth, because that's the truest thing that they know. Their outrage is true.
Do you think this is recent?
On some terrible argument.
Do you think this is recent? I mean, let's say the Greeks took some boats over to the Amazon, 2,500 years ago. I mean, do you think that they would be able to have any type of communication of their math and their philosophy to these hunter-gatherer tribes in the Amazon?
I have this idea that hunter-gatherer people, and I have not done any research into this, I have this idea about that hunter-gatherer people versus agricultural people. Again, the study that Scott has just come out with, it kind of muddies the distinction between the two. Let's just say a group that's more subsistence hunter-gatherer than settled sedentary farming people. Take those two extremes and look at them. I think you'll find that the hunter-gatherer people have a very, very specific local language, whereas the agricultural people, they do have some specific local stuff which they do use about their farms, but they also have vast generalizations about crops. They don't have specific knowledge of specific changes in the corn or something like that, because they're farming a huge tract. So you get this new idea of the general, the mass, instead of the specific. And I think the ability to generalize, it comes out of an agricultural sedentary people. I also think that they were confined to one place, and so they were prone to more speculation. I think a hunter-gatherer is less speculative. They're more in tune with the seasons, and the changes are something they anticipate and have words for, and so they're much more in tune with the earth. It's the people who are less in tune with the earth and are trying to war against the earth and transform it and control it. What's that?
General, are you still there?
Yeah, I heard you. I heard a beep.
Yeah, there's it's the smartphone. There's all kinds of forms of harassment.
But I also think this is true with the gods. The omnipotent God is basically an unknown generalization of divinity versus the very specific hurting and helping spirits, which are a local divinity. And you just see it. I think the hunter-gatherers all have, everything is localized, and versus the agriculturalist people who have now become the virtual world people who no longer have any local. There is no local on the internet. That's the globalized world of the virtual. It's even beyond the world. Now it's virtual. So where can truth and meaning come from? I think people resort to emotional responses, and their emotions are the truest thing they know.
So is it possible that an outside group came at the time of Göbekli Tepe? Is it Göbekli Tepe? What is it called?
Something like that. I've never said the words.
And so they came with just a different set of knowledge and language and resources that just didn't fit in to the earth.
Well, you understand the whole story is that at Göbekli Tepe, that was a hunter-gatherer area. And so suddenly you had these tremendous buildings that were only made possible in agricultural areas. The construction and I think there's actual writing too. There's some sort of inscriptions. And so this Göbekli Tepe or whatever, it doesn't fit with the narrative that they've established of hunter-gatherer peoples being incapable of being sedentary and building, or having the technology to build or the will to build like that. And also the time frame, it just seems much too early. It predates like anything else of that complexity in the entire world, apparently. So there's a lot of questions about it.
I think what happened is that an outside force came and dropped Twitter on all these people, and then they got reshaped. They got reshaped, and they dropped their local knowledge. They dropped their connection to the earth and their connection to one another. and they began to use records and measurement and engineering and math, and it all came from the outside. It's not something that they would have done on their own. And we've been recovering from that ever since. And anthropologists are perfect examples of tortured souls. They're aware of this departure. They're curious about it. They have theories. They're trying to document it. And then, bless their hearts, they're going into the last uncovered places of the earth, where, whether it's the Inuit or the Amazon, and they're uncovering and corrupting and disseminating Western culture to the last known.
Well, they're no doubt doing that, but I'm not sure though that they can actually uncover anything with their generalizing Western attitude. I just don't think that you can go in with the theoretical model and the language that they have and actually be able to talk about what is going on in a pre-literate hunter-gatherer society. I think the only way, I mean, Brody has attempted it and Carpenter has attempted it. Certainly Scott now is attempting something like that. But it still seems to me that you're coming up, Wittgenstein would say that you're coming up against the limits of language. And I think generalizations seem to have no limits. But that's not true at all. I think generalizations themselves are extremely limited. Well, because with a generalization, you can't get at a local idea. You could certainly think you've encapsulated a bunch of local ideas together, but you'll never be able, with a generalization, to explain why an idea is really local. Why these people have this local knowledge or this local word. You can't get some meaning from it by comparing it to some other local.
Well, I mean, what was the value of anthropology? Why did it begin? I mean, I think that the question that the anthropologists first began to pose, it was 100 or 120 years ago when the field was in its genesis, was what's wrong with these people? Why aren't they doing what we're doing? Why are these people in the Amazon sitting on this mound of gold and silver and aluminum, and why aren't they creating heavy machinery and grinding it up like we are? And why? And furthermore, why are they so bent out of shape when we push them off their land? And why won't they work at our factories? And why won't they take names? Why won't they take addresses? And why won't they become part of the state? What's wrong with these people? Why are they so unlike us? Were we once like that? And how the hell did we get out of that jam? I mean, I think
there's that whole idea that somehow or another this myth of, or the story of progress and evolution, these are very powerful narratives, but they're not even scientific. Evolution is not science. Evolution is literature, and progress is literature. These are things for a comparative literature department to talk about. Now, not for anthropologists to talk about or scientists to talk about. These are literary ideas. This is generalization stretched over time, but they've taken a powerful hold on people. People use these metaphors of these literary devices all the time with evolution and progress. And yes, these anthropologists think they are in a privileged position when they go in and they look at this stuff, because they have this tool bag filled with stuff which by its nature, it's able to talk about everything. But yet the local people are unable to talk about the anthropologists. They lack the vocabulary. And so there's this real, it's not even a conflict. It's just one group lording their technological abilities and language over another that's mute, that's completely mute.
There's a big difference between your anthropological perspective, and I'd group you in with the people you choose, Brody and Carpenter and Scott. And then there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of anthropologists that you've probably never paid attention to for a very good reason. And I think they're the leftists. They're the Marxists. They want to attack the West and create a guilt to weaken the West, to push for their destruction of the family and the growth of the state. But I think that your feeling of the West, that somehow it's caused pain in the souls of modern human beings, insofar as it is departed from some hunter-gatherer experience, it's very, very different. I don't think you have an agenda. I don't think you're out to dismantle the West. I think you've actually said that no, if you just live carefully and you can accept technological devices as being useful, but not transforming a person's complete perspective. I mean, do you see a difference between yourself and do you see a difference between like one group, Scott, you and Brody and Carpenter on the one hand, and then these leftists, these Marxists that are going in and trying to just make people feel guilty about civilization and progress altogether?
Scott is an outspoken Marxist, so he supports all of these downtrodden, all these people with the hidden transcripts that are running from the state.
Wait, how can Scott, an anarchist who's against the state, be for Marxism, which is about creating a state?
I know. I don't know why he says that. It seems like the anarchists are I have no idea what anarchists are really about.
Well, it's not that they're against rules. They're just against rulers. I mean, I always thought that the anarchist was that a person that felt that naturally we do create a system of rules and we do create a system of free trade, but it's the rulers we're trying to get rid of. And they think that the rulers begin with the establishment of the state, and they think that we'd kind of go back to way more happier and freer and productive way of living if we just got rid of the state. But the Marxists are all about building up the state and controlling and engineering things.
It doesn't. I don't understand exactly why he calls himself a Marxist, but in any case, he definitely aligns himself with the local people who are being traumatized by the state and have to evade the state, and he supports their evasions. Except he makes it his anthropological project to expose how they're doing these things against the state, which confuses me. But one of the things Scott talks about in this latest book, and it's worth mentioning within this context of the local and the general, is that Scott says about agriculture that it caused a contraction in knowledge about the natural world, contraction in physical health, because people lived simply on a grain diet, which was very bad for them. They had terrible epidemics because of these animals that they were living around in close proximity. So he basically sees agricultural life as being a massive contraction in the human condition. And he uses this word contraction. And I still have more of the book to read, but I think that's interesting, though, that he sees this contraction. But there's something I believe that also happened while this contraction was happening. And this was an expansion. And I believe, and this would take like philosophical anthropology to uncover. And I'm not sure that that's really a discipline that's been exposed or even really begun yet. But there was an expansion, I believe, in one way with agriculture. As the physical world contracted into something very simple and monolithic, and life became a lot less diverse, and the diet became a lot less diverse, and man himself became less diverse in the world in which he lived and in his knowledge, I believe that the individual became much more important. And I don't think that the individual really existed prior to agriculture. And this idea of the individual in the interior life, and all of this, I think, is an outgrowth of agriculture. And I don't believe, I'm not sure that hunter-gatherers have an interior life. Now, what does that all mean? I mean, an interior life, you might say. Well, I would say basically what it means is that there are no words to describe any of that. And although, yes, there might be motivations and thoughts, and you can watch a hunter-gatherer do certain things, and you know he's in pain or you know he's happy. So it would seem that there's something happening inside him, which is using Western language to describe these phenomenon. The whole notion, though, of this interiorized thinking and creating worlds and philosophizing in this generalized way, it's interesting that the ability to generalize, I believe, creates the individual. It creates the specific individual based upon the ability to generalize. So if there is a local region known to the agriculturalist, it's himself. It's his interior life. And I might think then perhaps that this is a mirage. This is a mistake of language. He's being led down it's a trick. He's tricking himself to think that there's an interior. Descartes was just tricking himself with all this madness about the demon who's playing with him and all this nonsense. Yeah, I mean, it could be a trick. I mean, anything could be a trick, but it doesn't. It still can have an effect in your life. It still can have consequences.
I mean, this is actually pretty profound. I thought what you were going to say, and I don't think that what I'm just about to say is mutually exclusive. I thought you were going to say that the individual went from, or the person, the hunter gatherer, went from having this diverse knowledge to the externalization of that knowledge through technology. So he had everything in his head, and he was pre-linguistic, and then he put everything in his head, in his heart, in his soul, into paper through language, and then through technology, through machines. His diversity of knowledge of the world went into things that were outside of him, and he became dependent on that. But that's not what you were saying. You were saying that he went from being not aware of his self to having his self being the center of everything. So then he would see an opposition of self versus society. But Inuit, for example, you still had individuals making artwork in their own way. It wasn't a group effort. When these guys would...
Yeah, but they never viewed... The word for making art and the word for poetry was the same word. It was breathing. And they viewed art as being something that was hidden itself in the bone that they were carving. So they were just the releasers of art. So it was never something that they attributed to one person.
But
it wasn't. You didn't say, hey Johnny, that's a beautiful carving that you made. Johnny wouldn't think that he made the carving. He would say, I don't know what you mean. That figure, the figure of the walrus, was hidden there inside the bone, and I just happened to find it and release it. Or they even felt like this when they sing a new song. Like the songs were in the air. They were just they were there, and they were releasing.
Were the helping and the hurting spirits shared among other people, or were they individual?
Yeah.
Because I remember that these guys had
they are individual.
Very individual helping and hurting spirits, and that was
yes.
and so I don't think any of this is a contradiction. I just think it makes the dialogue a lot more complicated, because
it is
the
external
omniscient deity was something which was very much for everyone, but very, very unknowable. It was just kind of something you had to bow down before. And the helping and hurting spirits, I believed, were individual. Now,
you're right.
I don't know if this throws a wrench into the idea of consciousness and reflectivity and the self versus the tribe. Maybe the Inuit were very, very unique because individuals did have to depart from the group from time to time. They'd get lost. I can't remember if they did group hunts and if they needed a group for hunting. But it's quite.
But I'm not saying though. I think I'm just not. I haven't yet clarified what I mean by the individual. And I'm not. It doesn't mean to say that people didn't do things on their own, or people didn't feel like they had seen something and no one else had seen it, or they had a helping or hindering spirit that was just theirs and theirs alone. All of that is true. The question is, what does the nature of possession, to say my, what does that exactly mean to them? And what does it also mean? What would it also mean to speak about something, an experience you had had that no one else had had? Is that attributable to you? And in what way? I mean, there must be some way to, and it's all going to be in the language. But when you don't have the ability to generalize, I believe you don't have the ability to become an individual and to feel alone as an individual.
Now, the Inuit,
I'm not sure that
the Inuit could have gone out by himself and said, "Look, I saw this mammoth." And then they would say, "Hey, Bob saw this mammoth. Did you hear about Bob's?" I mean, so there would be a way in which he would refer to himself and the fact that I, not with the group, saw this. Let's go get this mammoth.
Well, this kind of gets back to the whole private language argument of Wittgenstein. And Wittgenstein says there is no private language, right? So I think Wittgenstein is actually saying, he's disputing the whole Western notion of individuality. I think this is one of the big aspects of Wittgenstein that no one has explored, which is that the individual is a mirage. The whole idea of the individual has no philosophical basis. There is no individual. And I believe the Inuit know this. And I believe that Wittgenstein discovered this on his own by doing philosophy and by really breaking down language. And he reached these conclusions that he never actually really formulated straight out. But certainly his anti-Cartesianism in many ways points to this. And
language itself is a product of a big group of people, and it's a very social thing. But I think the question comes about when people have a lot of independent resources and they can isolate themselves for the rest of their lives and write philosophy alone. Nietzsche was by himself a lot of the time, just writing alone. But the point is that he's using a tool that was a group effort, and while you can isolate yourself and think about, can I make up my own language, and would that have any sense?
But right, you're pointing on you're making an important point there, which is that the technology of writing entails that someone be quietly alone, and that could no doubt give rise to some mistaken assumptions philosophically, that I am alone. Inuit people, if they were going to talk about something, there were to be words would have to be uttered. They wouldn't be read. Certainly wouldn't be alone reading something because there was no written language. Plato in many ways helps create this individual by the sheer act of writing and reading. You're offering up what is supposedly and seemingly a personal experience, which is only your own. But that's an illusion. But then if you want to build a whole philosophy that's based on this experience with this technology, then you I think you get Descartes, who very famously was just in his room by himself, laying in bed and imagining this demon torturing him. And he imagines himself like a clock, and that there must be some soul inside this machine. And it's all literature, really. He's using a metaphor of a clock, which was another technology, and using it to describe man. Now we're using the computer as a metaphor and software as the brain function. We're just using more metaphors. We're just using new technologies to make our metaphors about ourselves. But it's a question for literary people. It's not a question for scientists. It's certainly not a question for philosophers. And any philosopher who thinks that they're actually doing something called philosophy is completely mistaken. They're doing poetry, and they need a literary critic to analyze what they're doing, whether it's successful or not.
They need Warren Monk. They need Warren Monk to tell them about the simulacra. I keep getting back to the Inuit. I think that was one of your greatest discoveries, because these guys were the pure hunter-gatherers. They really had no shot at ever getting mixed up in agriculture. And
you have to go to where agriculture is impossible, and that's the only way to find them. I guess there must be some desert people too. I don't know. You have to go to the ends of the earth. We've discussed this quite a bit about places you can still kind of go. If you go to Patagonia, people are pastoral, so they're herders, and you get different language and you get different life. But one of the things that has not been done is to do anthropology with this sense of the language, and to start with the language and living out the words that people use in a local place, and then using that as a starting place for an anthropology, instead of doing it the other way around, which is to arrive in a local place with a bunch of general theories and concepts, and then analyze the local people within those theories and concepts, which are generalities. You need to flip itself. It needs to be flipped on its head. And I think if you flip it on its head and you have a local anthropology, which is devoid of... and I'm talking about something which is more descriptive.
You see the contradiction in the project. In order to be a good anthropologist, you have to be very good at externalizing and codifying and creating a theory and organize something systematically. But at the same time, in order to become sympathetic with the culture, you need to have a death of what you call the self, the autonomous consciousness that is opposed to being absorbed and assimilated into a group type of thinking. So I think the better and the more sympathetic the anthropologist gets, and actually adopting the cultural perspective that he's trying to understand, the duller his edge is going to become as an anthropologist. He's going to eventually just lose himself and become very unmotivated with the project of anthropology to begin with. As you said, these happy people that you ran into in Argentina when you were in the middle of nowhere weren't writing about what they were doing or what they were living. They weren't thinking and reflecting about all these modern Western worries because they were happy. And I think that you would just, if you truly understood and adopted a culture in this language that you talk about, what is the language of the Inuit that you're talking about? I can't remember what it's called. Inupiat. I think you'd begin to not give a shit about the anthropological project, and it would cave in. So there's this.
I think one time in the past we talked about this documentary by Werner Herzog about the people of the taiga,
right?
Taiga, and the hunters there, and I remember we were talking about how Herzog had kind of missed the whole point of their lives there, because he went there with this whole idea of why are these people so happy, and he used all of his big city, Western city concepts and all of the sort of the issues he had with Western life, and framed his whole discussion of these people and their ways within that context and answering the questions of the Westerners. It's sort of like the anthropologist who goes and looks at some native people and says, wow, there's no sexism between the sexes like we have. Wow, there's no racism. They don't even have words to describe other people that are different color-wise. They don't seem to care. Wow, they share everything. They're not capitalist. I mean, you've just basically looked at them as looking at yourself. You've not seen these people in any way at all, which I think is the mistake of any anthropological project. It certainly was the mistake of Herzog's film. If he really wanted to know about these people, he should have trapped with them and made his own skis like they made and done all these things and learned the language especially. And then he might have been equipped to make a film. But I think he probably wouldn't have wanted to make a film at that point. I mean, he certainly wouldn't have been able to talk about all the things that he talked about. Like their happiness. This notion of happiness is all about the individual, I believe. I mean, only these very individualized societies even talk about this. And I think the reason they talk about it is because the people are so goddamn unhappy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think anthropology is a great way to be miserable. You get close enough to these cultures, and you don't have the guts to take the actual plunge to lose your Western autonomous self. And just at the moment you get closest to this culture, you get cold feet, and you move back, and you write about it, and then you're a little bit more prepared next time when you go in and you uncover another culture and expose its hidden transcript and make it a little easier for the state to erode
there
it.
are stories.
Hey, and by the way, my since my boxing gym closes at 8, let's try to. Do you want to try to wrap this up in like 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's do that. But let me just mention this though about we talked about people joining these cultures. The Native Americans used to have white people join them frequently. They would run off or they'd be kidnapped and they'd be made a part of the tribe. And they never wanted to go back to the Western people, Western society. And even today, because you last night you sent me this link to this Mirabeau Lamar guy, who was instrumental in Texas history. But that led me. It's interesting. He very interesting guy. But he hated Indians and he wanted to kill all the Comanches and Cherokees that lived in Texas.
And he did.
And yeah, he did.
He didn't.
But
he was pretty good.
He also he was friends with Sam Houston, who was the president of Texas or whatever, governor or whatever it was, in between or after him or before him and after him. But Sam Houston had lived among the Cherokee, and he considered this Cherokee chief to be his father.
Do you know? You know, you're right about that. But do you know that he had 2 excursions? He was accepted to the tribe twice. The first time, do you know how old he was when he left his family? He was 14 years old. He got on a horse and joined the Cherokee Nation. Then, unlike most kids that leave their family when they're 14, he then got his law degree. So after he did the Cherokee Nation experience, he got his law degree, and then he was Attorney General or Secretary of State or both of Tennessee. Before he then went to Texas and was the the president of the Republic of the Independent Texas. Then he joined the Comanches.
Well, he also won the famous battle of San Jacinto.
Yeah,
to
lasted
create Texas.
18 minutes, right? Full surrender of the Mexican forces, and then he joined the Indian tribe. Was it Cherokee or Comanche? I don't know what it was.
Cherokee. Like, I guess it's a little strange what happened. It seemed to be personal reasons. Like, his wife left him, and it was never really explained why. And maybe he felt bad, and he just went back to the Cherokee, and he lived with the chief again.
It's kind of like going off to Colombia for a wife.
Yeah. But you know what, is that Lamar guy then declared war on the Cherokee, and it really pissed off Sam Houston, because he said, no, you got to leave the Cherokee alone. You can kill Comanches. I don't have any affiliation with the Comanches, but the Cherokee you got to leave alone. But the damn Lamar guy went off and killed the chief. He killed Sam Houston's chief father, this Jolly guy.
And
very
and you were right. He was very bitter about the Civil War. He thought it was stupid, and he during the Civil War, I think he just went off into a cabin and just kind of watched it unfold very bitterly, thinking there was a stupid waste.
Well, they stripped him of his governorship, and he died while the Civil War was on. But yeah, I don't know. But it is interesting, though. There probably are more stories of these people who have lived with the natives. I know that there's that guy Sebastian Junger who wrote this book called Tribe, where he talks about sort of the unhappiness and the happiness of people in our society, and then the happiness of soldiers. And he says that post-traumatic stress is really the confrontation of the camaraderie of war between men with their return to a society which has none of that camaraderie. I mean, he's got all these very interesting ideas. But he talks about a lot of these people who have gone native and then never wanted to go back. Even if it was under violence, they were violently raped and taken off, they love the native tribe that they're with.
What about the camaraderie of realizing that this whole dangerous world where everyone is a psychopath and kidnapping and drug trade? What about you cycle through Colombia, you cycle through all of Argentina, and everyone gives you a roasted asado every night and a place to sleep? I mean, how do you go back into a world where you have to pay $300 a night to be safe in a hotel because everything's just so nasty? And there's no way you're going to go to New York City and camp in Central Park. And you had the opposite happen to you when you left the country, and you didn't need any money, and you didn't have any plans, and the world ended up being a pretty friendly place after all. I mean, that's got to be an interesting form of post-traumatic stress syndrome too.
Exactly, and I think we both know it about how miserable this life in America and the West.
And how do you relate to other people that haven't
expenses.
done that? How do you relate to anyone who hasn't done that? I mean, I know.
Well, look, I mean, in some ways, we're both like the anthropologists who go off to a nicer place and we remark about how much nicer it is, and then we come back home to the shittier place and we live in the shittier place, which is what I think we're both doing right now. Yeah, we're doing it for different reasons, and we could always leave again, but we're living in the shittier place. And what is the reason? Well, you can make more money here. There's also a lot more trauma, and there's a lot more.
But
the danger is different.
Our species, at least the Western mind, is completely designed to understand the codification of human effort. In other words, dollars and language and. The reason why we'd want to write anthropology is no different than the reason why we'd want to record financial results in an Excel spreadsheet. It's the same thing. We're wired to do that.
The gathering of data and information. It's just ever increasing.
I have no direct connection to any of. I've never visited a factory that makes the stuff that actually grinds up the trees and produces the box plants. I don't even know. I look at things by division, consumer and other divisions, and look at it at the $1 billion level. How that makes sense to me and how I feel comfortable with that. And I feel very comfortable with that. I feel very satisfied by organizing all this stuff and crunching the numbers. I almost wonder if people are wired in a certain way, and if it's just too much violence to attempt to destroy that and then become sympathetic or join another tribe. I mean, if you think about it, Sam Houston was a lawyer and a legislator and a state builder, yet he was going to join the Cherokee tribe. That is, if that is not the greatest contradiction of any statesman.
Well, you have there the contrast of living in a very general world, the general world of laws and rules and statehood, versus this very specific local culture and family and place. It's exactly what I'm talking about. That's why a figure like Sam Houston is so interesting in that respect. How he, anyone who lived with a local tribe, but it's interesting that Sam Houston left that life and then went back to it again, because you don't have, at least that Sebastian Junger argues, you don't have a lot of that, like going back and forth. Hey, General, let's wrap this up. Things are happening here at home.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna stop it right now.